Welcome to the CisLunar experience. I'm your host, Vincent Maroli. Together on this show, we are going to interview the movers and shakers of this new space economy. Those courageous CEOs, chief engineers, academics, and policymakers that are turning dreams into reality.
There's a lot of companies working on things that will literally change the way we think of space and accessibility to space and what we can do and how we can function in space. And a lot of it's kind of stuck, in this pre-revenue, pre-commercial, semi-commercial coming from a government grant to actually having a commercially viable product. So a lot of it's stuck there. Mm-hmm. And that's what we really tend to target, is that, because a lot of the innovation or a lot of the funding that is going to space, if you all you got to do is dig one little layer into the numbers, and you realize that the vast majority of that is going to really a small group of companies.
That was Aaron Burnett, CEO and founder of Spaced Ventures. They built a space-specific crowdfunding platform that is bridging the gap between pre-revenue space companies and the average Joe and Jill investor. They have thousands of active investors on their platform and are constantly coming out with new deals. We sat down to have a conversation. I hope you enjoy. Aaron Burnett, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
Good to be here.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. This isn't our round two. We didn't have crazy dogs barking and all that.
A party outside.
Pretty much. It was quite an adventure. So down here in the Space Coast, Florida, here for this next week, first one of the experience week. Very excited about it. Walk us through, I think, probably what would be best for the audience and myself as well. Give us the elevator pitch on just what Space Ventures does right now. Mm-hmm. And then from there, we'll time machine, we'll go back.
Sure.
And then work our way up so we have more of a vision.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. So, with Space Ventures, we are building the world's largest community of space investors. That's the stated kind of goal, and we may already be there technically. We are essentially an angel investment platform for early stage space companies and really trying to ramp up innovation in the industry. Got a little emotional there, I guess. No, really trying to ramp up innovation in the industry, ultimately to, push humanity to Mars, the solar system, and the stars faster, right? So, goal is, a couple of different goals here, but one is to make like 1,000 SpaceXs, right? Yeah. With 1 million space investors backing them, right? That's the kind of the goal there, right? Yeah. Ultimately ramp up innovation in space really fast so we can all go to Mars in our lifetimes instead of just thinking about it for kids or grandkids.
Yeah. On that last point, we won't get too into the weeds here, but honestly, no desire to go to Mars, personally. I love space. Moon sounds great. Mars is just a little too far away for me. But
so the caveat to that, right? I say that a lot. Go to Mars. I'm not going to be the first 100, first 1,000, probably not even the first 100,000. When I want to go to Mars, it's essentially a tourist destination, right? It'll have a hotel, a bar of some kind, I'm sure. So that's when I think of going to Mars. That's what I think of. So one of the reasons why we need 1,000 SpaceXs, right? It's not to just go have a interesting journey and one-way trip or something like that. It's make it so that humans are truly multiplanetary. Species is on many different planets, on the moon as well, potentially. Just make life, as far as we know it, our idea of our conception of life, expand that out into the solar system and then in theory beyond. So that for me, when I say go to Mars, I think a lot of people think, you're going to go there to die, or you're some kind of adventurer. I'm not really the adventurer type. It's kind of like get on a cruise ship and go to Mars as a destination. That's how I want to get to at some point.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that in itself speaks to a level of optimism that 34, 32?
Yeah, 34, yeah.
34. I personally believe that that's totally doable. There's a lot of people out there that would say malarkey. There's no way that we're going to get space hotels and bars. There'll probably be alcohol because humans want to drink when work is hard. But space hotel on Mars, that's probably a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow.
Yeah. And full disclosure, it at the current rate, we won't get there. Not in our lifetime.
Yeah.
It'll happen. I'm pretty sure it'll happen at some point, but not in our lifetime. So that is kind of the whole purpose for what we're doing, right? Ramping up innovation. If we're able to, first principles, if you will, right? Thinking about what does it take to have that level of society on Mars, you need, essentially you're gonna need 1,000 different people innovating at the level of SpaceX, or you can insert a few other examples in there, but enough to push humanity, step functions forward. We need a lot more of that, whether that's robotics and deep technology, advanced materials, advanced manufacturing. There's a lot of different function or facets of technology that need to exist in order for us to be able to have the vision I have, which is probably the most optimistic, one of the most optimistic, viewpoints. And that's really what I'm pushing for, because that's what I want. And so, that's a big goal.
I love it.
And so, it's like building off of like Elon's goal of making humans multiplanetary. Technically, I guess, 2 people there is multiplanetary. For me, I take multiplanetary a little bit differently and say, we need to have like actual life and the quality of life that we would expect there. That kind of thing. You know what I mean? I'm sure it'll be different, but a different level of expectations and just like roughing it. But it's the kind of thing, right? If you can use the West as an example. Sure. People thought it was insane to have, cities or whatever, probably out West. It was like gold rush or what have you. Yeah. Now it's obvious that you would move that way. You have trains, or in our case, spaceships taking people, different things out to orbit or out West or whatever, right? And then things pop up around there and whole economies get built.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the same way. So I grew up in Georgia, and we're down here in Florida. And one of the things I remember learning is before air conditioning, there were people in Florida, but there was a lot less. And before we had decent, insecticides against mosquitoes, there was even less people down in Florida because it was just a hostile place to get malaria and such. Now that's gone, and it's the place that you go to retire or watch epic rockets launch, and no one even thinks about it.
Yeah.
So innovation gets spurred on because you go to new locations and you have to solve brand new problems.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way, needing it kind of is a forcing function sometimes.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of Florida in that way, but yeah, that's probably a good way of thinking about it. And there's all sorts of historical examples, right?
For sure.
But yeah, sometimes it's innovations that allow for it to happen. Sometimes it's innovation is a requirement for it to happen, so it could go either way. But yeah, I think it's about making it happen faster. Yeah. And there's a lot of companies working on really interesting things. So it's not just a, pipe dream, right? There's a lot of companies working on things that will literally change the way we think of space and accessibility to space and what we can do and how we can function in space on other planets. And a lot of it's kind of stuck, in this pre-revenue, pre-commercial, semi-commercial coming from a government grant to actually having a commercially viable product. So a lot of it's stuck there. And that's what we really tend to target, is that, kind of pre-revenue. There's other options, companies can utilize what we do for all sorts of, public allocations and stuff like that. But that early stage is, if we can really ramp that up, then you can see the the effect that would happen downstream. Because a lot of the innovation or a lot of the funding that is going to space, if you all you got to do is dig one little layer into the numbers, and you realize that the vast majority of that is going to really a small group of companies, as few as the 2020 numbers. This was even before a lot of the SPACs happened.
Sure.
And just the 2020 numbers was like 70% went to 9 companies or something like that of all private funding. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that there's definitely money going to other companies, younger companies. Obviously, they don't need as much as a later stage company either. But what you start to do is you start to see that the seed and Series A is kind of stagnated, even declined in some ways. Not much growth there with all this massive money that's going to space. You hear that narrative all the time. Sure. That a lot of that money is going later and later stage because it's kind of money, pushing a lot of the launch companies and things like that were already raising earlier, kind of need to keep raising to do more.
Yeah. And at that point, there's clear evidence that they can deliver. It's an easier pill to swallow from an investor standpoint. SpaceX has already physically done it. Sure, I'll try to get a little bit of return here, but the true innovation companies, those are the ones that are potentially still starving on the vine for the moment.
Yeah, I think some are getting funded, right? But not all of them. And I would argue the vast majority aren't getting funded. And, there's plenty of snake oil out there. Yeah. A lot of people like to say space just because they can get people to pay attention. And so, you can't just go out and throw money at all of them, which is part of what we do, right? We focus on space as an investment kind of thesis. Yeah. And what that means is you end up developing your own views and own kind of mechanisms for due diligence that allow you to do all sorts of different deep technologies operating in space, right? And you kind of have to have a decent viewpoint on that. And so we do that, put them through our platform, send them out to space investors. What I hope here soon is, no arguments to be had. The world's largest community of space investors, and you kind of go from there.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Yeah. So that's a really great dive into what Space Ventures is doing. Walk us back a little bit. So, younger age, first got hooked on space, first heard about it. I guess tell us that story, and tell us how I'm kind of cheating since we already covered this briefly, but cover how that initial story of getting hooked on space led you to that long-term thinking vision of, well, what could I do? What could I do in 10, 15?
Yeah, so I think, everyone has a little bit of that when they're a kid. Think about what they can do, what they want to do when they grow up, right? My first interaction with space would have been the memorable interaction. I'm sure I thought about this as well, but the one that really sticks in my mind is Space Camp, that movie. The little robot puts his friend in space with all of the adventures that come along. Yeah. So anyway, I definitely had that kind of interest and was intrigued by, space and stuff as a little kid. Fast forward, I think over the years, I enjoyed science fiction. Grew up watching Stargate SG-1 with my dad and my brother, and
classic show.
Yeah, we loved it. I mean, it probably isn't the best, critically acclaimed show or anything like that, but great adventures, right? Makes you think about cool stuff that can happen in space and all that.
The science is weird, but it's fun. Jack O'Neill.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe we still will uncover a Stargate someday. But so anyway, that was, for me, that was the, what it cemented in my mind was reality is different than fiction and fun, right? So I kind of bifurcated those two things in my head. I said, okay, well, if I'm going to be doing something real, science fiction is cool and a good thing to kind of sit down and think about when you're not in your 9 to 5, but 9 to 5 needs to be, a little different. so I went through all the normal kind of things, want to be an athlete and all this other stuff. But I think I put that in that bucket. And the same, being a professional athlete, being an astronaut, that's in a bucket over here.
Gotcha.
Right.
Yeah.
And so maybe I'm pragmatic or whatever, just felt like that was reality. And so, yeah, I think like many do, which is that space and stuff is for other people, smarter people, richer people, pilots, whatever. So it was pretty easy for me to kind of say, okay, that's for someone else.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I grew up in my first kind of interactions with space.
Okay. So one of the other things that you shared with me was from that young age, there was this deep desire of, I want to make an impact somehow, some way in the world.
Yeah, I think that's like a little bit of human, maybe you could argue hubris kind of thing, where it's like, how can I, it's kind of, we're full of stories, right, about people that have done things. It's like the Einsteins of the world or whatever, right? Like one person somehow changes the course of human history, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're inundated with that. I think we probably hype that up more than it needs to be. But yes, it's, what can we do? How can we make an impact? What can I do with my life that is meaningful, right? And so, yeah, like that kind of desire, I think, was, ingrained in me. I don't think anyone necessarily did that. Maybe it's just the nature of growing up and listening to stories that we listened to growing up.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely was something. And, as a kid, it was very imaginative and trying to figure out what I could do and what was that thing. So then I, fast forward to college, what have you. I was doing business and marketing and finance were my 2 degrees technically. So I came out of school with that. Actually, the thought process was I thought maybe a financial advisor. That was kind of the thought process. And in fact, I had 2 offers coming out of school. One was for LexisNexis, which is a technology. They do a lot of data and stuff like that. Fortune 500. Well, they were then. I don't know if they are now. And then the other was Charles Schwab, which would have been like the Series 7 route, financial advisor. And I didn't take the Charles Schwab route. I took the marketing, the twist here, kind of full circle, but took the marketing at a Fortune 500 kind of route, and then kind of landed in that and realized I didn't like Fortune 500. It felt quite bureaucratic.
Yeah.
So then I started moving into the startup world.
Okay.
Enjoyed that. It wasn't really all that long, and then kind of hit 25. I have what I call my quarter life crisis, which was this idea of like, am I making that impact? I can kind of forecast out my life from where I'm at. Let's assume even a successful trajectory. Sure. Am I happy with that? And I felt like I wanted to do something with more meaning or impact. Did I really know what that was, or no? It's just young enough, and you can make stupid decisions when you're younger and still be okay. And so that was my thought process there. Yeah. Right around the same time I'm having this, whatever it is, crisis, epiphany, whatever. My friend is teaching in Paraguay, and he's like, "Hey, we need some teachers." And they always need teachers. I mean, they pay almost nothing. It's essentially a volunteer role.
Yep.
And some they pay better, but this one was paying nothing essentially. Barely cover cost of living. But I was like, okay, interesting. And so I thought, well, go down, and if I do something like that, which ended up was teaching 2nd grade, which was quite a jump from business and marketing. And so I could do that. It's an interesting kind of experience, collect the experience, figure that out. And so, it was also like the thought process was, if you want to do something meaningful, AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, Teach Through America, there's all these different programs. Yeah. There's a reason those volunteer programs kind of exist. I think it is for people trying to figure out what they want to do. So I kind of made my own version of that and did that. And that's what I did for 2 years. Taught for almost a year of that, and then volunteered doing some teaching as well, but also like other grades and stuff needed me, but then also volunteering at a children's home down in Asunción, Paraguay as well, just to kind of like get that sense of everything. Yeah. So yeah, it was like, how do I make an impact? Yeah. So yeah, that was where I was at, and it puts me there in South America at the time at 25 years old.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how if life isn't crazy enough, it goes back to the old Ferris Bueller quote. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop to look around and every once in a while, you might just miss it. Fantastic. I watched that probably a couple months ago, and I can think of a story of my father doing the same thing. He was in the Air Force for many years, and he was over in the sand pit somewhere, as he would call it, and he was 40. He was like, what in the world am I still doing over here? Like, I've been handling my own finances and friends for a while. Let me switch. And he had a not quite midlife, 40-year-old crisis, and made that dramatic switch. But he did it with wife and kids already here. And, I'm kind of doing the same thing as 20, 24, 25-year-old. None of those yet. And so there's definitely different benefits of you have a lot more flexibility when you're 25. You can move to Paraguay, except maybe you don't have the experience and the built-up capital to make that jump. But I think it all comes down to if you don't take those opportunities, then you'll end up being 80 and just mad.
Yeah, you could, right? And I think that's kind of the risk of just taking the safe or predictable route. And I might not be the best example for everyone, but I do say you can do some pretty crazy stuff and gather some of those experiences. And literally, I think your 20s, the thing you need to do during your 20s, because there's a lot of flexibility, but the thing you really need to do is collect experiences, as many as possible, diverse experiences. One, to open up your mind. So if you can travel, like when I say travel, I don't mean, just backpack and do whatever. When I think of travel, I think like actually live and experience places. I I lived out of a backpack for almost 5 years. But I didn't like backpack from one place to the next for every week. That's like its own little subculture. So you're experiencing that culture, but you're essentially just living with other travelers and doing this hostel sort of thing.
Yeah. That's
its own experience, and you can do that. I'd like lived in different places for years or months at a time, and so of the 5 years I was just in South America in 3 countries in South America: Ecuador, Paraguay, and Argentina, and really Buenos Aires, Argentina. But yeah, if you're young, it's like that's kind of what you should do. Because you need to kind of know that. Most people don't really know what they want to do. That's just the way it is. You don't really know what it is you want to do until you've kind of experienced some things. And then you'll be able to look back and be like, oh yeah, you actually use these random assortment of experiences to do something interesting with, and built a interesting career or life with. So I think it's a good thing. You'd be surprised at what you need. I was lucky enough to not come out of college with debt. I had to do some of my own work to make that happen, and my parents were able to help a little bit as well. Nice. So I was able to come out with, 0 on the balance sheet, which is better than most, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And I would argue that, like, unfortunately, the degree was not worth the expense. Almost in most cases, it's not worth the expense. Right. In some rare situations, it is.
Even with a marketing and finance.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And most definitely with things like marketing, just because a lot of it is human psychology and things like that. I've learned far more from doing it than I have. And I think everyone says this. This isn't like a crazy new thing. You learn quite a bit more from doing it and just experiencing that than you would from, got the train in the background again.
Good stuff.
Than you would from just any of the other, books or what have you. But it takes them a while to write books, and by that time they're already out of date. So anyway, kind of thinking about the collection of all that and what it is that you're doing. You're really just collecting those experiences, taking that learning, and you can make the jump better than you would think you would be able to. Because I didn't have much savings. I saved a little bit from a couple of years. It was like 3 years of professional experience at that point.
Yeah.
So I had some savings, but I was living for less than $500 a day independently. It wasn't like living in someone else's house the whole time in Paraguay. So you can do that. You can be frugal and still collect some experiences. Can get rough, to the point where I met my now wife in Buenos Aires, and we got married, and that night or the day after or whatever, I was looking and the bank account was down to $500. Yeah. And that was, I don't think she had anything either. Really. It was like shared essentially at that point. It's like, yikes. So, it's a very nerve wracking place to be.
Back is up against the wall. There's only one way to go.
Yeah. That's one way of looking at it. Right. As we were in Buenos Aires, at that point, we were literally sharing a house. So we had like a floor, but it was, we shared a kitchen with an old lady. So we had roommates as a married couple.
Nice.
So that was an interesting experience, but pushed me to start doing remote work because I had to. Yeah. And I had all this experience, but going back into getting a normal, real, whatever you want to call it, job. Working remotely, doing whatever I could back when remote work was still a perk. This was back in 2016, and it was like cool. There was a perk to be remote work, so you'd get a substantial discount on your salary. That was normally the case. Yeah. I had to work my way into it. So yes, there's some risk involved, but you can get pushed right up against a wall if you need to, and be surprised at what you can do when your back is against a wall. There's
a quote from, Napoleon Hill, great book, Think and Grow Rich. I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's, there is no limit to what a man can achieve when he risks everything on a single turn of the wheel. It's like, just go for it.
Yeah, it's scary and it's nerve wracking. It's hard kind of to take that kind of risk. But yeah, I mean, to the point where when we were starting Space Ventures, so I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but it was like, okay, we have so much money in the bank account. So, my wife and I would have been married for probably about 4 years, so maybe 2020, maybe going on 2021 at the time. So we were able to have built up a little bit more in the bank account. And we're like, what can we, and at this time it had already been 2 years and I wanted to be in space. So we'll go back to that. Yeah. But, I had always had like, here's a number I can kind of put aside to take a year minimum, maybe 2, if we can stretch it. Yeah. So we can build my own company, because I'd been at startups ever since Quarter Life Crisis. I already was at a startup, but then have been working at startups, in remote work. Yeah. During that whole time from 2016 to 2020. So it's like, now I have a little bit of something to risk again. So I have a little bit of a habit of, getting something and then risking it all. Not that it was all of it, it was a little bit more intelligent that time. Sure. But yeah, I mean, if you can take risk, calculated enough to, I'm still gonna have a roof over my head or something. Yeah. You can do quite a bit with it. It never feels certain in the moment though. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's a good reminder for myself, right? This is a new thing for me. I've got all my Excel sheets and all the ramen and chicken from Sam's Club for my budgets, and it might fail miserably, but it just might not.
Exactly. Yeah, you gotta take that risk. It's when I see people that are trying to take risks like you, and I just kind of remind that tell stories like this, and you can take the risk. I don't view myself as having arrived by any means.
Sure.
I feel like I'm taking a risk every day, doing what we're doing. But it's just, it can be worth it.
Yeah.
One way of thinking about it, I think some people have said this and it's helped me think about it. One way of thinking about how you're going to live your life is like if you're thinking of your life as an actual biography, like a book, or the pages worth reading, or the chapters worth reading, right? Because then all of a sudden it's like, okay, kind of do some crazy stuff, and it actually is interesting to tell this story, right? Yeah. And it can be kind of a crazy way to live too, if you think about just as that. That's probably taking it a little too far. Everything you have to do is to have some crazy, life or death kind of story. No, but at the same time, it may help you think about, like, if you're telling the story down the line, is it interesting?
Well, and I think this will be a good tie back to what really got you inspired about space. When I hear stories of Jeff Bezos, for example, some people will know this, some won't. He was in high school when he read, was it the High Frontier from, oh gosh, I'm forgetting his name. Help me. O'Neill.
Okay, yeah.
Big classic book written in the 70s describing how maybe planets aren't the best place for humans to expand. Maybe we should just build mega cities rotating in space. Mm-hmm. And little Jeff at the time was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do space, and wrote papers and articles in the school newspaper, and look at him now, has a space company. And so it's, right, that's someone who, there's probably plenty that have failed, but he had that compelling story from 16 all the way through to 50 plus now. That's a really exciting story to listen to. And it probably helped him get a bunch of investors and pitches, because not only he had the fervor, but like that came through. So taking that, from that story of Jeff, you were exposed to space early on. What was really the driver that said, okay, I'm a full functioning adult. I've got a wife, a little more than $500. Let me get back into the space industry.
Yeah, so, I don't have a traditional background. I've done engineering or what have you. I wouldn't draw direct parallels or anything to Jeff Bezos, but, I did have some of that inspiration growing up. But I definitely had clearly bifurcated space, astronaut. You might as well want to be a professional astronaut or a professional athlete or what have you, right? It's like, few people get that. I'm not special enough or whatever. And I'm not trying to say woe is me, or I was like depressed or something, but that was in its own box. And so then everything else, like space and stuff, fun stuff, was entertainment, truly fiction, right? Like for that. So yeah, it was like escape. It wasn't real. So when I saw the Falcon Heavy launch with the Tesla on top, I was live streaming that. I would have been in Ecuador at the time. Went back and forth between the two cities quite often, between the two countries quite often. I saw that happening, and I was like, wow, like this is science fiction. As far as I was concerned, my brain had aligned these boosters that were landing side by side. Quite honestly, like now that I learned about the technology, like the innovation technology behind it wasn't all that interesting. Like they did it. It's hard, really hard. But, at the same time, they were able to kind of pull it together. But my brain was like, that is science fiction. That is not real. Like it kind of broke my brain a little bit, where I was saying, how can I justify what is clearly something that I would see in a sci-fi show or read in a book versus this is actually happening in front of me. Right. And so it's like, I want to be a part of that. Right. That is something interesting. So this kind of drive to do impact, I'm in South America thinking from this mindset of, hey, I just like threw a big wrench into my life. And I'm in South America. I found, we would have been married maybe a couple of years at that point, 2.5 or so. And so it wasn't like regretting the move, but from a career perspective, there's quite a wrench thrown into it. So it was like, I still had that context. seeing that, it awoken all my passion that, I'd had for space as a kid. And in like the possible, what was impossible seemed possible, right? Mm-hmm. Those two things kind of got, jumbled up in my head. And I was like, well, I need to figure out a way to be involved. So that started me on, 2 solid years of just how do I get involved? How do I be a part of this industry? What is this industry? Like, I had to learn more about it. Like, seeing the rockets is one thing, and learning about rockets or watching Everyday Astronaut or whatever, it's like, it's a very singular view of what's going on. So I tried to learn as much as I could about the industry, about science. I would binge all sorts of stuff and
take it from that this is fiction to
what's real, and then understand where the business and economics lie, because that was kind of a natural interest for me.
For sure.
Then look for specific opportunities for myself to be involved, and to find only that, like someone who comes from a marketing and growth background, not all that many opportunities in space, a couple of years back, not all that many opportunities. And so I said, how can I add value? So that moment really pushed me to figure that out.
Okay. So as you're wrestling through there, how do I add value uniquely to you? Because you could have just taken a finance job making Excel spreadsheets at a space company. You had the background. You probably could do that, but was that your unique skill? Not so much. So as you're wrestling through there, was there I guess in your research, did you find, okay, here's a big problem in the space industry that I could fix, that I could help solve? Or did you come to this conclusion more so of, these are my skills, let me try to build something around it?
It's never so linear, right? I think it sounds linear coming from the past, but it was like, how can I be involved? I want to find a real way to be involved, So it started, my background, my professional background, though I had a background in finance, my professional background was mainly in marketing. And so I was looking for those kind of jobs. How do I get a job at SpaceX? They had no marketing roles. It was like a communications role. It was probably the only thing they had at that point. And they're very specific sort of person they're looking for. Now I'm really my skill set. Had no interest in the finance stuff. I learned that pretty quickly. And then from there, it was like just understanding the industry and where the opportunities lie. I was just trying to figure it out. Like, I knew there was something I was going to do, didn't know what it was. So it was just open, had my mind open to the different possibilities. So as I was doing that and learning about different things, I dove in. One of the things in my research was going and finding about the funding side of space.
Sure.
And that's where I learned and kind of did that initial digging. Well, there's a lot of money, but it's heavily going to a few companies. And the number of companies getting funded at early stages seems to be a lot smaller than actually exists. So I had done all this research on space companies, so I knew there were hundreds and thousands potentially. It depends on how you define it. Some people take a lot of liberties and say there's 10,000. Some people are very restrictive and say there's hundreds, right?
If you count Netflix because they stream data from space, they're a space company.
Yeah.
I don't really want to count them.
Yeah, but it's up for debate, right? And so but even so, I knew there's at least hundreds, and you're talking potentially every year, maybe 50, maybe 100 are getting funded at early stages. In some years, maybe 150 at best. I mean, and that depends on your definition as well. So, I just knew that there was something there. And then I started talking with founders. I had been talking with startup founders for a long time. So it was natural for me to have that conversation with founders. I heard the same story over and over again, which was, every VC or venture or whoever I talk to says the same thing. Come back to me when I have revenue. But I can't get to revenue because I need 1 million, 2 million. So somewhere between 1 and 5 million. They always said the same thing. Okay, there's a pattern. And the data bore that out. And it was like, man, these people that are saying this seem to be the types of people that shouldn't have this problem, right? Like, seems real. I'm not necessarily smart enough with the technology background to know that for sure, but maybe there's something there. So I was doing that. Now, at the same time, what I was doing is an outlet for, kind of building up this knowledge base in space was I started building the Mars Walkers Pinterest account.
Yeah.
So what that was essentially just curating content, the space-related content. And at the time, there was essentially less than 5 even space-focused accounts on Pinterest. My wife's the one who said to go to Pinterest. I said, oh, that's, heavily dominated by women. No one will want that, yada, yada, yada. I don't know. I had something in my head, and she said, no, you should do it. So I did. And at the time, there was also almost no one doing video. So what I did was make and curate and then make, just by clipping into the right sizes, Pinterest optimized space videos, giving the credit to everyone. I linked out all over the internet, right, to everyone that made them. So some would be like Everyday Astronaut, clip his stuff, or, the SpaceX explosion videos, clip them. Yeah. So I started that in July of 2020. Yeah, July of 2020. By November of 2020, it had 3 million unique monthly viewers. Yeah. So, and Pinterest is its own thing. Like, getting a lot of viewers isn't necessarily as hard as getting the followers and all this other stuff. But it has its own algorithm. Still, that's a big number. Yeah. So I was able to then say, okay, well, I knew I could do the community side. I've done it before, and in business and marketing. So I was like, this was a proof point, though, that other people could look at it. Look, that's the link. That's me, So that helped. So I was able to say, okay, there's a community, and oh, by the way, there's this need. It's a kind of a shame. Kind of like embarrassed that it took that long for the light bulb to go off, because I think from even as this thing was building from July to November, I think it was until at least October before the light bulb really went off. And in fact, somewhere in between those two times, I even took this idea to someone else. It took me a while to think I could do it. I took the idea to actually Space Angels group.
Yeah.
So you should do CF, because at this point in time, I hit the idea that it could be a crowdfunding mechanism as the function for this had come up, but it still hadn't connected that I could be the one. So somewhere in between those two times, I realized there was something there. Someone could do something about that. Yeah. And then I finally said, maybe it's me. And then pitched that around, found my co-founder, Brant Arsenault, who comes from 30 years on Wall Street. So we were both kind of going through similar paths of coming out of whatever industries we were in. He was in Wall Street, so big funding kind of stuff. In fact, I think he had just closed like 30 million round or something for the company he was at. Nice. That he had co-founded. But he was coming out of that, and I was, coming out of my thing, and we'd met kind of naturally just by doing networking and stuff as people interested in space. So we were connecting, talking for a while, and then eventually it was like, maybe I should make this happen. And that was in early 2020. Yeah. So maybe I've got my dates wrong. And that was all this stuff was happening in 2019, sorry. And then in 2020 is when we connected. So we knew each other for almost a year by the time we actually pulled the trigger, because it was in May of 2020 where we actually pulled the trigger on filing everything and getting things started and kind of going from there. So I had all my dates wrong. It was 2018 when the Falcon Heavy went up, and 2019 when we moved here just to be close to rockets. Yep. And then 2020 when we actually started the business officially with Brant and filed and all that stuff, May 6th of 2020. Okay, gotcha. Technically when the incorporation happened.
I think that was the day that I graduated college. Pretty close to it.
Yeah, so, great day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I was aiming for May 4th. Actually, I didn't think about it, but then I realized, oh, how cool. I knew it was close to that date.
Yep.
But May 4th, I think that year was like a Saturday.
Okay.
So it would be, my wife ended up filing for her business and getting it incorporated. And she didn't do this on purpose either, but ended up being on May 4th, 2021.
Nice.
So her business anniversary is May the 4th, which is, big for Star Wars and
May the
science.
4th be with you.
Exactly. So I missed it by 2 days, and she got it right on the dot. So
Gotcha.
Yep.
So jumping into the crowdfunding aspect, you said there was this huge need from the space founders. They don't have revenue yet, so they can't go to the VCs. They need that $1 to $5 million range. Is individual investors like a mom and pop, Mike the plumber, is that the best way to get that $1 million? I mean, that seems like you have to build quite the community versus, I don't know, I guess alternative ways.
yeah.
I guess I'm just trying to grapple with that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a good question. So there are alternatives, right? You can just do normal angel syndicate investing, or angel syndicates as a founder. You can go to those. Right now, their checks are starting to increase. Actually, starting probably to pull back a little bit given the current climate. But generally speaking, it was anywhere between $100,000 to $250,000 checks, and you pull a few of them together. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. Obviously, all accredited.
Sure.
But even so, the check sizes are still fairly significant. You can also do earlier stage venture. They do exist, and just in the last 2 years, they've kind of exploded. And some of them are great partners, but still, generally, check sizes $500,000 to $1 million. Fewer and farther between. Still, most don't understand space. And in fact, with space, you have such a variety of technologies that are involved. It can be quite hard. And so some are great, and there's some that are out there, and they're supportive, and they'll write checks for early stage founders. Still doesn't really meet the demand. Okay. Functionally, and I think logically, it works quite well using crowdfunding, because what you're really doing is space is risky. Early stage startups are risky.
Yeah.
Generally, like anything, even a software where you could build it overnight in theory and launch and see if it works, it's already risky. Then you have space, which is a very capital intensive and risky environment, and all sorts of things can happen. And you have what is most cases a hardware environment that lives in space. So hardware has a whole new timeline risk to it, because it normally takes a few months just to build something, much less get it tested and then put on a rocket and up in space.
Sure.
Those timelines are reducing, but still pretty long compared to a software kind of play. So all of that in mind, high risk. Yeah. And you would assume that's higher even than most venture portfolio risk, which is 1 in 10, 1 in 20 kind of risk, where they hope they win one. So in theory, this is even worse than that. 1 in 20, if you're lucky, can be won. So with that in mind, one of the best ways to handle that risk is to reduce check size, right? Because if you're doing 1 in 20 and you're writing $1 million check, you would need $20 million and hope, you do that right. If you're writing $100,000 checks, you would need, quite a few. You need $2 million to prove that out, and it's still a lot of risk. And again, your whole livelihood can be dependent on just a handful of checks that you're writing, right? Yeah. So you got to be a little bit more selective. You have to have different criteria. Often cases, it could just be, a lot of the companies that do get founded tend to have a very interesting story, or that like someone comes out of a big, SpaceX or what have you. So there's a lot of other people that are doing really good work. So I would say that the vast majority of opportunities are just being kind of thrown to the wayside. And they may just say, oh, it's because it's not good enough or what have you. I mean, the reality is the risk-reward ratio isn't set correctly, right? And so when you start to reduce check sizes down to as little as $100 or $1,000, that's something that anyone individually can risk. Most people can risk that. for the opportunity for, a big gain. So when you start to aggregate that together, it matters more. One of the limiting factors is a regulatory limiting factor. Why angel groups don't do that? Well, it's regulatory and market size limiting, right? Okay. There's limits that were 100 people max in an SPV, which is a special purpose vehicle. It's what they use to aggregate people together as one.
Gotcha.
So that was a limiting factor for them.
Yeah.
Now it's 250. Even so, your check sizes still need to be pretty sizable. Start doing legal stuff around it. So if you can have, thought process being, if you can get check sizes as low as 100 or 500 or $1,000 into a company, you can aggregate those in a limitless way together. What kind of power can you have with that?
Yeah.
Right? So that's where then all of a sudden individually those risks are easy. And the risk reward is much easier. You can throw $100 and be okay to lose it if it does go in the likely chance that it goes under, just because that's the way the risks work out. But if you do make it big, it's a nice little check for the amount of risk you put out there. But together, you're still risking as a group $1 million or $5 million, right? So now all of a sudden the risks and the rewards start to balance out.
Yeah.
Individual risk, still the group risk is still high, of course. So it's just a nice logical mechanism to balance out the risk and reward, and then to also give innovators a shot at early stages.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. I needed that thesis of how the collective in that sense is a really good addition. So I guess the problem that you guys are probably encountering in the beginning is $100 check sizes. We only have 1,000 investors or whatever, and you're trying to just build that community aspect.
Yeah.
I guess I'm curious, besides just distributing the love, the risk to all these different people, what's really the goal there of the community aspect of building that up?
Yeah. So in something that, to answer the question you said before as well, there's more than the risk and reward thing is kind of the logical function behind it, but also when you have 1,000 or 5,000 or 500 backers that are actually invested in you, there's a different scale of potential options, right, when it comes to tapping a network. So one of the things that we're really trying to build, we're focused on building, it's not just the world's largest community of space investors, because it's just easier to say that than the deeper thing we want to build, right? What we really want to build is the smartest capital a space investor can find. What does that mean? So we target and look for a lot of our investors to come from the space industry. The industry, with engineers and technical backgrounds. You also have a lot of folks that are from the finance world and things like that. People that can add value to the founder. So that's what we really we're trying to find. At scale, that's a very powerful mechanism.
Yeah.
Because then you as a founder can say, hey, I'm looking for a contact at XYZ company. Anyone out there? No. If you're asking 500 people, in theory, the chances are quite a bit higher. It's really what we try and do. Obviously, are all 500 people going to be watching at your beck and call? No. So there is a money aspect, right? Get some money in the door, right? At early stages, it's way more important than at later stages. Getting that network, spreading the story is incredible value to founders.
Yeah.
So, one of the founders who was actually one of the first one on our platform, they said, when we first started, we had to do all the sales calls and call out, talk to people. After this, and they didn't raise $2 million or anything yet on the platform. The community's still growing and raising significant amounts of money, but not what we want it to be. $5 million every single time is what we want.
Right.
But what we would like to see, what they saw, even with a few hundred investors, now they have inbound coming into them. Now they're fielding calls for their technology and able to work on projects that way. So, is that going to work for everyone the same way all the time? Not necessarily, but at the same time, it's a great way to get yourself out there, put yourself in the large group of people, a lot of people from the industry that are looking and interested and want to, use your product down the line.
Well, and I also see it as, let's let the engineers do what they're good at.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to be spending 80% of your time raising money.
Yeah.
If you do that, you're not going to be able to build the epic machinery.
Yeah.
Go build the stuff and we'll film it and we'll tell a bunch of people about it. And it gets back to the whole 1,000 true fans sort of mindset. If you got those guys on all your social medias, that's what SpaceX, I think, has done an incredible job of. They have fans that have never ridden on a rocket.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, VCs often have to pitch value because there's money, right? You come talk to the venture capitalists because they have money, but they often have to pitch value because now there's quite a bit of money to be had out there. And so if you go and look at some of the venture groups that are out there, what you'll find is that the ones that actually care and provide value stand out a lot because the vast majority don't. And quite frankly, it makes sense. Can you field calls from everyone you've ever invested in and, help them find a company or help them whatever? No, the reality is most people don't have that much time all the time to be doing that. So when it comes down to something like that, when you have more people, more different schedules to potentially take advantage of and all that, it makes a lot more sense for, any one of those people in the crowd, especially if we can get that crowd of people to be heavily from the aerospace industry and in the companies that you want to go have conversations with and all that stuff. It makes a lot of sense for that to be, one of your best sources of actual value add, whether that's finding an engineer, whether that's finding a connection to the customer you're looking to get or what have you.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I guess that sort of, I think, segments into another thing that's been on my mind for a while, which is the idea of the blue ocean of space. Right now it's like California before the gold rush got, bloody. There's a lot of opportunity out there. There's a lot of potential collaboration. Within the U.S. and some of the other democratic space countries out there, we have a lot of entrepreneurial spirits, as evidenced by this entire conversation. But what we don't have is a unified 50-year plan for the country, governmental and private sector-wise. China does, and they've been implementing it for 3 or 4 years, and they are catching up rapidly. So I guess I'm curious, probably on do you see a value in broad U.S. governmental unification in some way, shape, or form? And going into that a bit deeper, what role can these different companies act? How can they actually collaborate instead of just putting that on their PR page and then, sorry, this is proprietary information? Yeah,
I mean, when you talk about government and having plans and things like that, I mean, the way I view one of the key values of the government is to really push much further, right? Really push the envelope into things that require all sorts of deep exploration, because you can amass budgets and the best minds to push that envelope. You could argue that the focus has been in near Earth orbit for a while, which really kind of blunted or stunted, I guess I should say, our growth potentially, right?
Yeah.
And so, what you're starting to see now is, I think, NASA and other government agencies starting to take their hand off the control knob of low Earth orbit Earth orbit, and letting companies come in and innovate and do what they do in government or in commercially run kind of economies. But they can start to shift more towards things that are further out, like Artemis programs and things like that. So I do think that's helpful. I do think that helps to kind of focus that. Having said that, there's a significant movement towards decentralization in general that I don't think it's like you have to have one person or one small group calling the shots for any kind of innovation to happen. Now, getting a lot of people together, there's been some really interesting things that have happened because of, decentralized Web3 shot calling, right? Like DAOs are coming together and deciding in large groups to say, hey, we're going to go buy the U.S. Constitution. And they pulled together, I don't know, 30 or something $1 million to go do that. And like one guy with a lot of money just outbid them just to say, oh, I'm better, I'm smarter or whatever than the crowd. But the reality is the crowd stepping up.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to pull this back to crowdfunding. I'm just saying you can, in scale, figure out ways, even though you're decentralized, to bring things together intelligently and still accomplish quite a bit. Having said that, there's definitely a head start kind of advantage someone like a China has, where it's a few people calling the shots, and you're just organizing it that way. So I think they can coexist, right? With the entity that we have in place with the government right now, with NASA. And what's really cool about Space Force is that now one way of looking at it is you kind of doubled, while there's two different mentalities. One's more science and exploration, and one's more, defense. But you've doubled dedicated funding towards space technology and things like that, and innovation in space. So that's what I like to see, because it's kind of taking it seriously. So I do think, one of the downsides we have in the way things are set up is that we tend to have like changes in our priorities. Yeah. This is always a problem. But are we going to then all of a sudden that would take some massive shifts in the way we think about organizations and governments and how NASA gets their orders and all this other stuff. Yeah. I'm not sure that we're necessarily, going to do that. Maybe we can, maybe we could detach things from, a 4-year cycle somehow. But then that puts a lot of pressure on making the right call just now and hoping it's the right thing in the future. Who knows if that's the right thing? So, I think there's pros and cons to any kind of democracy versus communism versus decentralized versus heavily centralized. Yeah. But I want to count that out, right? I think it's going to be the human drive that really pushes that forward. So there are tools and mechanisms in place with Web3 and others to allow for many people, millions, to come together and decide one thing is a good important goal. Yeah. And by the way, you can also set these structures up so that they don't allow for changes all the time. And if you get enough people together internationally to make that decision, we'll reevaluate this every so many years, but this is its goal and this is what they're going to do, and that doesn't change. And we agreed on it now, right? So there's ways of doing things like that. So
that's the whole DAO and Web3. It's so new, and there's so much to learn about Web3, and I've exposed myself to NFTs and was like, all right, 95% of these are going to be 2001 tech companies that pop. There'll be a few that are great. Yeah, I don't even know if I want to invest in those. Even whatever. That's not my cup of tea. Started learning more about just the decentralized nature, the DAOs, and that kind of stuff. Going into the company collaboration, one of the things we've seen in the space industry is it's hard. Yeah. And so people start off with a niche idea, and sometimes they're successful, and then mergers and acquisitions take place. The one that first comes to mind is Redwire. They now have, I think it's 9 different small space subsidiaries within them. Satellite manufacturer, satellite maintenance, data processor, manufacturing in space, and a couple others that I can't remember. And so, they're collaborating by becoming one. I guess I'm curious, with your exposure to Web3 and just a lot more of the actual founders down here on the coast, is there, do you see a potential of, let's call it we used a Star Wars analogy earlier, let's use a Star Trek, a federation of different U.S. space companies? We're like, hey, we're individual, but we are making it down. We're making the decision that, hey, we all want to do this sort of trajectory for the next 20 years. Let's see how we can help each other.
Yeah, there's definitely plenty of opportunities. And, so like you mentioned Redwire, Voyager is doing something similar, Voyager Space Holdings. Dylan doing really cool stuff over there similarly. And you have groups like Foundation for the Future and others that are organizing together and saying, hey, we care about, something that, we should get infrastructure funding for building actual space infrastructure. Whether that's a, space elevator or something crazy, well, I say crazy, there's some people that think it's actually here, and, I really can't say that it's not. So regardless, like that kind of stuff, there's definitely opportunities to do that kind of thing. I think what you're seeing economically in general, though, is, it was very important for a company like SpaceX, and Planet even said this, like vertically integrate. Right? We need to own all the parts of the value chain so that we can build everything in house and we can build and break and move faster.
Yeah.
I think that is something that will change. I can't say exactly how soon it will, but I think it's something that will change, because what you have is, a lot of more startups who have that mentality. So SpaceX, they're a 20-year-old company, right? So they had to have that mentality, because all the people that would have been providers for them for some kind of, some kind of nut or wrench or whatever, could delay their timelines. It could take 20 months to give me this tank or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So they try and take as little of that risk as possible. Nowadays, what you see is a lot more opportunity for kind of horizontal sort of opportunities where you can actually do more off-the-shelf sort of building. And it's not there yet. Like, most satellites are kind of built bespoke. They may have like a CubeSat frame or something, but it's still hard to get off-the-shelf stuff. There's definitely off-the-shelf providers, but you get to big people with very specific goals, and they kind of want their own thing. So at some point that shifts over, and the whole, thing becomes quite integrated, and you can pull an off-the-shelf component. No one, people that are building laptops in many cases aren't fully vertically integrated. Apple did this big move to their own thing recently, but there's a lot of good examples of, horizontal sort of alignment and non-vertical integration either can work. But I think essentially my point here is, as that economy develops, I think you're going to see that naturally happen, because there's economic incentives to not just be your own thing and, hide your IP from everyone or whatever, is to open source things and work together on certain things, and, bring this tank with this propulsion engine, because, it's all readily available and standardized. Once you start standardizing things, a lot easier to work together. So I think that'll naturally happen. As well.
Yeah. So I guess one thing that pops up there is, you said you've big fan of, history books, looking at, past founders and such. Love me some Audible, and the Carnegie biography is probably one of my go-tos. The book itself is, 900 pages or something insane, but it's 36 hours on Audible, no big deal. But one of the things that those guys just dogmatically did was they vertically integrated everything that they possibly could. The coal, the coal ovens, the coal mines, the coke ovens that would then refine it to make the steel, the rail, everything. And it allowed Carnegie and then eventually U.S. Steel to balloon into this behemoth that then offered it steel at the lowest possible price. That was their whole thesis, was we want to make this commodity so cheap that there's brand new use cases for it.
Yeah.
To me, that's something that SpaceX and others could easily do.
Yeah.
Right? Rocket doesn't really feel like a commodity at this point, but a $97 flight on Spirit Airlines, that kind of is. And so as those economies change, I guess I'm curious, with the introduction of this Web3, the decentralized sort of stuff, you think that's really what's changing that dynamic and the old model doesn't work, or is there still pieces?
No, it's just, but just like the Carnegies, then you've got the other examples of horizontal integration that worked really well too. Well, as far as for monopolies are concerned, if you want to say work really well there, I think that has very little to do with I think that has very little to do with Web3 and a lot more to do with just the natural economy as it's developing, right?
Okay.
Like there's more opportunities where vertical integration matters so much more now than it will in 10 years or what have you.
I see.
So there's different business strategies, of course.
Yeah.
Right. So you can take any strategy really, and hopefully it works out, right? But I think I guess my point is it was so important for over the last 20 years because of the way the supply chains were, right, in space, and still are in many cases. And some founders will probably disagree with me right now, but there's many founders that I know that are talking right now. They're saying, I'm building everything myself, but I had no intentions to do that long term. I intend to own this layer of the thing I'm building.
Gotcha.
So that's the thing I'm worried about.
Yeah.
At some point I'll buy this component and that component from someone else. Right now, no one builds them for me, or the people that do are out of whack on timelines. And, so there are people that are literally vertically integrating out just so that they can have what they want. And then but they would gladly offload it down the line. We're shifting and growing, right? That whole supply chain and ecosystem is being built out. Once those exist for, easier founders, once there's a lot of off the shelf components for making lives, founders' lives easier, just to work off of this stack. That'll be the way that it's done. But, think about it right now, like in the internet industry, if you're building a technology, we built a fintech platform, so to speak. If we didn't go buy the server racks and build it in a closet somewhere,
Right.
We use AWS or you can pick whoever you want, right? You can use whoever you want to put your software on that and let them do that, and someone else supplies the actual hardware, and AWS manages it or whatever. They provide middlewares, and so that is what a more robust economy looks like. A less robust economy looks like back when internet was first being run up. Everyone you had to have a server in your closet in a room in your office, and then you started to buy a little bit of space, but you still had your own rack, but in someone else's office. And then you move to okay, I'll just buy space, buy the time on someone else's servers, right? So how does that evolve over time in hardware, in software, and in space in general, right? These are fairly natural economic evolutions. There'll always be people that vertically integrate and think that's the only way to do it. But I think I guess my point is there's just more room for more options, and there's more ability for people to kind of coexist in a interdependent ecosystem, the way we're all interdependent in the fintech world or whatever on other companies, right? They're doing big things. So I think there's ways for us to, think beyond that little kind of bubble of, well, I have to build this one thing, everything from, all the way from the bottom to the top, and it's the only way it'll work. I think in SpaceX case, it worked perfectly. In several others, it will work well. And then there's still others where it might work, but it might take, you might die before you ever get to really do what you want to see happen in the full vertical integration.
Okay. That's a good framework for me of you might need to vertically integrate in the very beginning just so that you don't have 5 years of time delay.
Yeah,
and
it's like a necessity rather than a real strategy. It's
right.
like, okay, do this now, and you kind of have to have a go-to-market.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a go-to-market around your building. Sometimes there's a go-to-market around your actual marketing strategy and who you're selling to and all that.
Yeah. So, okay, as the industry progresses, let's say over the next 20 years, has there been some technologies just in the, since 2020, when Space Ventures was really getting up there, have there been some technologies that either you've been exposed to or that have actually become deal flows that you see the potential of this tech to do one of those exponential hockey curves?
Yeah, I think there's a few that kind of come to mind. I think that are on the precipice of something interesting. I mean, I'm going to talk more generally.
Sure.
So, I think when you think of, so it's really like a market that's evolved in the last 2 years is orbital servicing, assembly, and manufacturing, OSAM.
Got
Right.
it.
I mean, there's been companies doing stuff or trying to do stuff. So like, Made in Space, now part of Redwire.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all been relatively small and specific. But it's starting to become more of a thing now, to the point where now you see Space Force and everyone doing like a SIBR around it and all this sort of stuff. Now in the last year, you've seen the announcement of 3 or 4 commercially privately owned space stations.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Them existing, the mere fact that they will exist means you need a servicing ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So like now you've got people worried about space debris, astroscale, and others. Now you got people worried about refueling on orbit fab, and others. This is becoming more of a natural conversation, and it will be its own mini economy up there, where you may have stuff that exists and was maybe launched from here to exist in orbit, but all of the transactions, the financial ones are probably happening on Earth, but all the physical transactions are happening up in space, where you don't really do anything. It's like, I own something up there, you own something up there, let's interact and do our business and move on.
Yeah.
But we never really did anything down here, right? That's happening, and there's quite a bit of opportunities. You got companies that just provide machine vision solutions, right? Like watching space situational awareness, using machine vision to help with that.
Okay.
People that are doing like providing just the space situational awareness individually as a service or as like an actual component you can buy. That's something that we don't need as much in an orbit, in a thing where there's no real OSAM kind of market, right? So it just that's a building market, and there's a lot of opportunities there, but you can think of like all these different services that exist in a robust orbital ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And then, if you want to dive in a little bit deeper, something that's interesting to me, and who knows, not many people talk about it. So I guess it's a risk, but it's, hybrid rocket engines. Okay. So this is like hyper focused, right? Because it's in propulsion. It's like a subset of propulsion. And so what's interesting about hybrids is that, like, they can be super easy to manufacture. They can be super easy to manufacture.
Okay.
So there's an interesting thing there, because as you know, Elon and others have stated the hardest thing about what they're building is manufacturing lines, scaling that up. Yeah. The technology, while it's itself hard and not that easy, rocket science, it being rocket science, getting it to something you can rebuild many, many, many times is the real difficult piece. So if you get something that starts simple, which hybrid rocket engines are quite simple.
Before digging into that, from myself and maybe some other guys out there, define hybrid rocket engines.
So a hybrid rocket engine is a hybrid of liquid and solid propulsion. So you have solid propulsion, which is essentially, think of it like the boosters on the space shuttle, or a firework, right? You light it and it goes up, and you don't know where it's going to go. Hopefully you're pointing in the right direction. And then the liquid are 2 different liquid controls. So it's Raptor engines, all the major engines you're used to seeing. Also on the shuttle, the RS-25s. I always get my RS-RLs confused.
One of those is the Russian one.
But it's the beautiful, massively complex hydrogen engine that was on the space shuttles. Awesome, but very complex, right?
Yeah.
And all liquid. So liquid oxidizer and liquid propellant, and you mix them and they blow up, and right. Okay, so it's essentially a rocket engine. A hybrid is a solid propellant, so some kind of fuel of some kind. A lot of times it's essentially kind of like a plastic. You can think of it as like a solid that way, and then a liquid oxidizer. So it's got a hole in it normally in the middle, and you shoot oxygen, liquid oxygen, or whatever your oxidizer is through the middle, so you can control it because you can spray more or less. But essentially, your entire combustion chamber is a cast fuel.
Yeah.
So you're exploding in the middle of it and shooting down the end, and it burns out kind of like this.
Okay.
Like from the center to the outside.
Yeah.
So they've had problems for a long time. This isn't perfect. This has been around for a long time. They have efficiency issues. So, getting to orbit, no one's gone orbital with a hybrid rocket engine. So my fundamental high level belief is that once that happens, which there are at least 4 companies getting close to that, like very close. Like I think within 6 to 18 months, you'll see one of these happen.
Wow.
Then all of a sudden it will really blow up as a use case for propulsion innovation, because there's already people looking at it, and Virgin Galactic has a hybrid. So,
okay.
But going orbital still is a hard thing, because you can't get perfect efficiency and all this other stuff. Like you can fine tune that with liquid.
Yeah.
But once you get to good enough, which, SpaceX and others are really good at proving, good enough can take you a long way. But once you get to good enough, then, and go orbital with it, the benefits of a hybrid are crazy, because the most complex hybrid I've seen, and I'm not a rocket scientist, so grain of salt, but it's like got 10 moving pieces.
Sheesh.
Okay.
That's nothing.
And a Raptor engine is like 100 moving pieces just in the turbo pump. So like many orders of magnitude increase in complexity with one versus the other. So if you start with something much simpler, manufacturing that's much easier.
Yeah.
Back to the point of something that's very easy to manufacture is now something quite powerful. So, I know one group that's doing one that is one moving piece and can be 3D printed, and an orbital class rocket can be 3D printed for $10,000. So,
whoa.
Imagine a world where, and that's not even where they're really improving on, the fuels. So the fuels can be improved upon and are being improved upon to help with efficiency. There's all sorts of things there to improve upon. It's not fundamentally like a physics problem. It's just refinement, engineering, and chemistry with the fuels themselves. Chemistry casting and 3D printing of fuels is happening. They're 3D printing the fuels in a perfect, alignment, so they can get a better, burn and more equal burn and all this stuff. So there are very smart people working on that. My fundamental belief is that probably in this next 6 to 18 months, an interesting kind of paradigm shifter will happen, where 1 or 2 or 3 will go orbital, and then it's going to force people to think about, if I can go orbital with something that cheap and that easy to make at scale, why am I building Raptor engines with thousands of moving pieces or hundreds of moving pieces? Still reasons to do it, right? But it will be far less of a throwaway.
Yeah.
So there's other reasons for it too. The real reasons those things are improving, hybrids are improving, is because of hypersonics, like missiles and defense.
Okay.
Gotcha. As well as hypersonic planes and things like that. That's the real reason they're doing it, because they can get like the efficiency they need, but it's essentially a throwaway, right? So it's designed to be that way. So it can be quite powerful that way. So it's one of the reasons you see investment being done in R&D. It's not like someone's just hoping and toiling away to make a launch company someday. But you can imagine, if you have something like that, potentially you can, with that rocket technology, you can build a nice launch company on top of it, or just be a supplier to launch companies or what have you. There's a lot of potential reasons for it to be interesting. Not many people talk about it. I think it was kind of interesting a while ago and not anymore. And some people try and kind of like kill it. Like, I don't know. To me, it's like, if there are this many people, really smart companies working on it and getting this close, I think, if you see that go orbital, it makes a lot of people wonder, why not? Because then that's a fundamental, shift in the way that, rocket engines, which are what, like 90% of the cost of a rocket in general, if you can then make that very easy to mass produce, it actually, in theory, will even start to make, do we actually have to worry about reusability, at least for a little bit? And then it'll come back to both, right? You want to be reusable in general. But then all of a sudden the costs become a lot more interesting there. Then we'll worry about space elevators and something someday for that to really drop the cost down.
So couple questions there.
Sure.
One, you said there's 3 or 4 companies in that. Are those guys still skunk works? Their names aren't allowed to be known, or?
No, there's companies. The ones that I'm following and aware of, and there's probably a few others that I'm not thinking of, but there's Firehawk. They just raised a Series A. I think Raytheon, Firehawk Aerospace is one.
Okay.
There's a company Via Space who's down the road here.
Yeah.
There's a company in Canada called Reaction Dynamics, and they have a good relationship with the Canadian Space Agency. I think CSA just said something about using them for their launching. That's one of their primary providers. So that's a good relationship for them to have. And then there's a company called Equatorial Space Systems as well. That's come out of a long history of hybrid rocket engines and some really smart people there. They're going through TechStars right now, I think.
Nice.
So none of these people that are like just sitting in a garage or something with an idea. I mean, it's real companies putting real money behind it, who I've seen their technology, in first person in some cases. Nice. It's just a matter of time. So like the hypersonics is a real driver for, the early investment. So like I don't know this, so don't quote me or anything on that, but I'm pretty sure that Raytheon probably invested in them for the hypersonics missiles applications.
Sure.
For Firehawk.
So just to put those pieces together, right? There's an international threat of hypersonic missiles already being developed. We may or may not even be able to shoot those down if they were to come our way. So a ton of money going into hypersonic planes, Boom and Hermes is the other one, and then also into the rockets to try to find a way to intercept those missiles. And if I'm hearing you right, it's sort of similar to the Mercury program.
Yeah. Right.
We had a big rocket for the sake of being an actual rocket or missile, and we're just swapping out the payloads.
Yeah. I mean, this could be very similar to the Apollo, the space program originally, right? Where really was some kind of military concern, and we just happened to have a cool offshoot of space exploration that came out of it. This could be one of those dual use, really funded heavily for efficiency and things like that to improve it based off a kind of a hypersonic application. But a lot of these guys that are building these, they're like thinking of it. They're space nuts, and they're trying to make a launcher out of it or what have you. So they get funded for dual use, and then they think, okay, how can I, turn this into something that's more meaningful for launching and things like that.
Gotcha.
So it just really wouldn't surprise me that the next, like I said, 6 to 18 months, don't hold me to it, but over the next, in the next 1 to 3 years, big things happen there, and I think it will make people pay attention. So that's like the exploding propulsion side of things. That's interesting to me. I think I'm one of the only people pushing that. I mean, I'm not the only one that's talked about this. It's been around for years, maybe 40 years. I don't even know. As long as people have been thinking about rockets, really. But it's not. I just think it's kind of been put into the back corner, collecting dust as an idea that nothing will happen. But there have been people who've been working on it this whole time, and who I think it may be close to being ready to really take center stage. And there are people that, like I said, hybrids have been used in different applications, but it as a fundamental technology shifter to kind of create a paradigm shift in the way space launch is done, the way that hypersonics is done. I think we're getting pretty close to that.
And probably one of those elements is just the advancement of 3D printing, right? If the if figuring out how the fuel is going to burn is a major piece, and now I can perfectly lay my solid fuel, that's one less variable.
Well, there's a company here in Melbourne that work. Some of them work here out of this facility actually that does rocket fuel. They have a pretty large contract. What they're doing is it's roughly nanotechnology that allows for the actual chemical makeup of the fuel to line up better for fuel efficiency.
Wow.
So that's a company that is, so even 3D printing and making it the fuel grain more efficient, that's one thing. But if you can make the fuel molecularly inside of that fuel grain burn more efficiently to the point where they can essentially line up aluminum molecules to where they can almost burn clean, which is kind of, I didn't even think of aluminum as a source for fuel, but they can create drop-ins like propellant. You think of like putting something in your tank to get more fuel efficiency or whatever, right? They can essentially do the same thing with much more robust, rocket fuels. So that's another good example of a dual-use technology that they really want that for, hypersonics.
Sure.
Fuels. Military's got large contracts coming their way. They can't make this fuel fast enough, right? So they can use that. You can use that in a world where hybrid rocket engines become viable as an orbital source of propulsion. Now all of a sudden that fuel becomes even more important because as we know, efficiency is problems with hybrids. They're finally getting into orbit. If you can optimize that efficiency as much as 40% increase in efficiency off of, just making the fuel then all of a sudden this already cheap and easy to manufacture propulsion engine now has increased in better efficiency when they were already okay with good enough. Now all of a sudden it's like, okay, now it's really, really interesting.
I think one of the biggest ahas I'm getting from this or questions I have is the tyranny of the rocket equation. Is that antiquated?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, then there you go.
It's still there. It's just that this is a propulsion technology that is getting up to the efficiency that needs to get up to the point where now it's just going to be easier. Tyranny of the rocket equation is still a thing, right? It's still there. We're just refining and optimizing our ways to get around it. And there's, aerospike's another way to create efficiencies. My personal take on that is like, I think you commented on a LinkedIn post about one.
Yeah,
you saw the cross section of that thing, right? Beautiful, but it looked like it needed an AI to generate that.
Yep.
Right, like that. That is complexity. So at some point, maybe it's very easy to make that with advanced manufacturing. But there's increases in complexity for an aerospike. So what I like, the exact opposite of a hybrid, is the decreases in complexity that are being done to be able to get to the same good enough. So that's why I think it's probably the first thing that really starts to, from a rocket propulsion sort of innovation, I think that's the first thing that takes over. Then maybe aerospike, you can combine those two. If you can really get a perfect aerospike with all of the worries about thermal management that come along with it, then that's another layer of efficiency. But see, what we're talking about is we're talking about optimization on optimization. Yeah. Right. The rocket equation is still
fair enough.
Pretty dominating there. You're just optimizing, small percentages to really get a little bit better and a little bit better.
Fair. When efficiency, if the perfect efficiency is 90% or whatever, and for the past 60 years we've been an efficiency of 30. Yeah. 50-60% efficiency looks like magic.
Yeah, it can. But you're still fundamentally, held down by things like, how much fuel can you take up to get as far as you want to. So I think we'll probably still have, until we get something crazy like massively large infrastructures, like skyhooks, like space elevators, or whatever things that could be created, right? Until we get to that level, we're probably going to have specialization, like of rockets that are getting you off planet into low Earth orbit, and then things that are moving from low Earth orbit to beyond, right? Yeah. So there's last mile delivery. There's different things that are, set up for propulsion to take you from, that are really not designed to get you off planet, but are designed to work really well when you're in space. Yeah. There's all sorts of cool new technology coming up on that.
Just like
very
tugboats
interesting.
From like Leo to Geo kind of tugboat, or?
Yeah, those exist based on electric propulsion. I'm talking about new propulsion stuff that's very interesting in orbit.
Okay.
Like fusion based, very cool. Coming right out of, I mean, this is early, but it's coming right out of institutions, like coming out of academia off of cutting edge research. This is by the way, the benefit of early stage innovation and venture, because when you start doing that, you know, when there's a source for that, you can start having people that are thinking about taking stuff from a lab.
Yep.
How can I take this thing that I just figured out in a lab, and I can scale it up? If you have enough money that's sitting there, that's interested in taking the risk and patient enough to wait for it.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the other problems with venture is that there's risk involved. There's also timeline risk, and a lot of this, I need to make money within 7 years.
Yeah.
And that's a hard, and we're always going to have that with space, mainly because there's a big distance gap. The further you go from Earth to the moon, whatever, it just takes longer. Timelines get longer until we have, you know, massive innovation in propulsion to get people to Mars faster. Like the minimum just to put something on Mars to test it would be, you know, a year, or it could be 2 years or 3 years, depending on, you know, where they are in orbit.
Yeah.
It could be a few months at best. So like, you're not like testing and iterating on cool stuff on Earth and putting it at Mars to see what happens, right? Even in that world where we're on Mars already, right? Yeah. Okay. So there's always going to be some of this requirement for patient capital,
right, that
can tolerate not only long-term, but also immediate risk. So that's why I like this idea. Let's early stage, $1 to $5 million, bring lots of people together with small checks.
Yeah.
And we're already proving it's working. It's just, we aren't raising a $5 million yet.
Right.
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know,
you just need more people.
I'm bullish that it's going to happen in, you know, months, not years.
Love to see it.
But it'll happen. And when it does, it'll just, you know, beget more innovation. There's more, you know, liquidity for more innovation. Better minds are going to come out and say, okay, we just did this in a lab. Now let's make it something. Yeah. But I mean, I'm telling you that propulsion, really interesting. I can think of 3 right now. I think they're all in stealth and quiet, so I can't say anything about them. But 2 of them are just coming out, and one of them is coming from like an absolute leader in the industry who came out of SpaceX and built the Raptor engine. So, yeah, those are interesting things that are just coming out, and that sort of stuff needs innovation, patient capital that's willing to throw money in and be in it for the long haul, right? Obviously, we're all happy if we get an ROI, an actual dollars and cents ROI. But see, the difference between angels and venture is that in venture, that ROI is their business, their livelihood. In angels, it's their money, and you can accept an ROI that's not dollar related.
Oh, so that's fair.
Okay, so like I want money back. I'm not saying
sure.
I in my business we take some equity in these deals. We want real money back.
Right.
Having said that, the ROI can also be establishing a future for humanity off planet. Am I willing to maybe go down from a 10x ROI to an 8x ROI and say that 2x I'm willing to, you know, swallow for building a better future for the planet, or what I envision is the future that I want to build? See, that's where all of a sudden you start, you know, not saying people don't want money and don't want to have a return, and this is like a crowdfunding where, you know, we're just happy and, you know, willing to donate.
Right.
What I'm saying is it's a different level of tolerance, especially when you're talking about $100 checks or $1,000 checks, right? Where if that can matter for the future, the ROI can be quite a bit different, especially when you start talking portfolio theory.
Well, and if we jump into just the individual for a second, right? Mm-hmm. You took the major risk at 25 in your midlife crisis. I'm taking that risk now. There's a part of that that's character, built in, nurtured, whatever you want to call it. But you said it earlier. I mean, humans, we want to have an impact somehow. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm, you know, Mike, the truck driver or the truck logistics guy, and I I'm 55. I can't switch my career, but I still want to deeply be involved and help push humanity forward. Well, maybe I won't switch careers, but hell, I can put a couple $1,000 towards actually seeing that take place.
Yeah, and it's, if you can't turn the wrench yourself, maybe you're paying the person to turn the wrench is one way of looking at it. But yeah, I mean, there's ways to be involved. We're building the future we want to see, investing in the future we want to see. So, this doesn't work if there aren't actual returns, right?
Sure.
And so we do due diligence with the mindset that there's real returns here.
Right.
But we also are very, open. Risks is increased. Timeline risk is increased for everyone involved, right? We have to understand what we're doing here. We put a lot of effort in due diligencing our companies to make sure that the tech's real, not breaking too many laws of physics, and there's an actual market for this. It's not just a product looking for a solution looking for a problem. Sorry.
Sure.
There is a problem there that can be fixed. But having said that, there's sometimes the market doesn't know what it needs until it exists too, but you can't take too many of those risks either. So, we're trying to find the top 1% of this aerospace industry and bring them to the public, but hopefully they're ready for that. We can't guarantee any kind of return or anything like that, but hopefully they're ready for that. But this is also what I enjoy doing. So the conversations, and we talk about hypersonics with hybrid rocket engines and understanding all that. I love that, and having those conversations. So we get to use that and, share that with the public, that knowledge with the public in a way that gets a lot of people involved in the industry, gives them access to really cool companies, not only to invest, but also just to follow on the story and kind of go from there.
So on that last point, I know we need to be wrapping up decently soon here. Right, so there's ways to get involved, there's ways to turn the wrench, there's ways to invest in turning the wrench. We've talked about a ton of innovations that is probably going to make space travel much, much cheaper. Let's say the next 2 decades, what sort of jobs, roles do you really see developing? There's, depending on which color channel you watch for your news, there's a ton of talk about huge skills gap. We don't have, mechanics, plumbers, X, Y, Z. Is the space industry gonna hit that, or are we gonna be able to automate a bunch of that? I guess I'm just curious where your thoughts are on future job growth of the industry.
Well, there's, probably different time horizons, of course, but there advanced manufacturing is taking manufacturing jobs and making them easier, but there's also still a lot of human involved in manufacturing for space. So I think there's a lot of on the ground jobs. I believe Florida opened up, I forget which institution, but they actually opened up like a skills school for like space skills, and the space skills being like, manufacturing and building stuff. So it's not just a white collar sort of thing or what have you, right? There's a lot of opportunities there. So I do think that'll unfold. And you're talking about going from like 3,000 or something active satellites to now 30,000 active satellites over the next few years, and potentially quite a bit more. That means there's a lot of opportunity in manufacturing in space, and that has its own unique requirements, and there will be automation and robotics that helps to make that easier, but we're quite a ways away from like pushing a button and a spacecraft being built just from that push of a button, right? You're still going to have technicians and things like that. I think there's opportunities there, and I think there's just generally opportunities for creative problem solving in general. So engineering, I think, is always going to probably be needed. Well, to some point, until we, create the singularity with a mega AI that can solve all of our problems. But even so, the creative problem solving is quite a unique human trait for people to go and figure out what solutions based on all the different learnings they have can be built, right? So I think between engineers and things like that, there's always going to be opportunities there to solve problems creatively.
I love that. All right, so final thing, and then I'll let you do a pitch for Space Ventures if this whole show hasn't been one. Paint the picture for us, right? You're clearly an optimist. You want you want to retire on Mars or at least visit. Personally, like I really want a honeymoon destination or 20th year anniversary up on the moon.
Yeah.
Goals. You're trying to create this future. Paint it for us. What do you see? What's your ideal of that's actually tangible in the next 20, 40 years if we get our stuff together?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the goal is to have actual industry on the moon, things being built on the moon, launched. I would like to see 1 million people on Mars. So, 1 million person city or whatever has its own requirements, and that doesn't happen without industry on the moon. I would love to see orbital space stations as well. In fact, those would probably be better to live in. But so I'd love to see some of those. I'm not sure that that's the ones with artificial gravity. There's several doing some real cool stuff, but like as far as like an actual city, or like someone with something with like 100,000 people or something, may or may not be totally viable within 20 years, but within 40, totally viable. Yeah. So I'm not talking like Elysium style, but there's definitely smaller versions of that still have artificial gravity. You can actually do real things there, and several people working on that. So I envision all three of those things, and I want all three of those things. Yeah. So, solar power coming from orbit. I anticipate fusion to be there on the moon. And I anticipate robots to be building a lot of stuff for us with robotics and advanced manufacturing and doing a lot of the heavy lifting and dangerous work for us on the moon, launching things off the moon with, essentially large cannons. One's coming on the platform soon, launching them to Mars from the moon, with raw materials and things like that. That's what I'm anticipating.
Love
stuff
it.
Like that.
Yeah, I'm like halfway through A High Frontier, and they describe that back in the 70s. Let's industrialize the moon.
Yeah, my visions really are nothing more than just repeating other people's visions. Sure. There, just seeing like it a little bit more real because I'm seeing the technology that enables it.
Right.
So, I think it's totally reasonable with the way we're accelerating innovation, and what we're starting to see now is overlaps of technology where it matters. So, you've got robotics and advanced manufacturing coming together, quantum enabling quantum robotics to help with advanced manufacturing. Got advanced materials. Being with advanced manufacturing. All these things are starting to kind of come together. When those happen, there's a lot of, talking about like paradigm shifters or whatever, a lot of paradigm shifting sort of technologies happening within the span of 20 years, not within the span of, 2 centuries.
Yeah. It's an exciting time. I don't know if I would have had the patience to have seen us landing on the moon and be this in love with space. I hope I would have, but I'm just not quite sure.
Yeah, I'm bound and determined to make sure that doesn't happen by bringing in lots of investors. It doesn't happen again, I should say, right? To bring in lots of investors to, push innovation at early stages faster, which is going to get innovation all the way through the pipe faster, get us moving. Like I just, part of it's like a fear of not seeing that happen again, no matter what kind of bubbles we have.
Sure.
Not seeing something like that happen again. Force people, to explore and move out into the solar system and then out into the stars eventually.
I love it. Aaron, it's been a pleasure. You've got a couple exciting events coming up on the Space Ventures platform.
Yeah, so we have new deals coming out kind of consistently. By the time this is live, I don't know when they'll actually be out, but we have new deals coming out consistently on the platform. We do love to have, investors from all walks of life, but also from, the space industry and things like that. Engineers and all that stuff. We need as many of you as possible. Always looking for, new people to come on to the platform, whether you're a founder or an investor, and willing to, have conversations and educate when we can.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, we'll have links down in the description.
Sure.
For all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, Aaron, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me here. Thanks for helping coordinate a little bit of this Space Coast trip.
Yeah.
means a lot for the one man show. So yeah, everyone else out there at Astra, keep dreaming. And if you haven't gone outside and enjoyed some blue sky, go get some blue sky, because it's good for the soul. All right. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the show. If you got some value out of this, drop us a review and a thumbs up wherever you're listening or watching this show. We had a review from Ben M016 the other day. Appreciate it, Bam. He said, love the long interview, which does a good job at deep diving into CisLunar Industries' business model and aspirations. Hope to see more of those episodes. Ben, appreciate the review, man. There are more. This is installment number 3, and we got more coming out every 2 weeks or so. So drop a review, and we'll be sure to read it on the show. Check us out on the social medias. I am at J. Vincent Maroli. Sounds like cannoli, ravioli, all that delicious Italian food. If you have any additional thoughts or questions about the show or being a guest on future episodes, reach on out. LinkedIn, probably the best place. I'll get back to you promptly. If you're interested in investing in space, again, Spaced Ventures, these guys have a great platform. They really do their due diligence. So be sure to head over there and tell them who sent you. And until next time, go get some blue sky, and don't forget to aim and aim high. Blessings.